Welcome to Expanded Knowledge. In this video, we are going to be looking at the interview that UFO crash retrieval whistleblower Jake Barber gave this past Saturday evening on NewsNation with the investigative journalist Ross Coulthart. So basically, I put the streaming of the NewsNation on my computer, watched it here, and just took hand notes because I really wanted to sit and just listen to Jake Barber kind of take the whole thing in. We were sort of expecting a lot. I mean, it was definitely hyped up that this was going to be game changing and that we were going to see footage of a crash retrieval UFO operation and all this. And so I think the interview was, and the whole event was more nuanced than maybe what we might have expected. So here I'm going to be giving you what I thought were the key takeaways. We'll have some slides here to organize the information. And then actually we're going to do something at the end. I'm going to have Pavel from the Psychoactivo podcast, which Pavel has been covering the UFO, UAP, and other related topics for a while now. And he's really great at staying up on the latest information. Pavel really has his ear to what's going on and kind of what's going through the grapevine. And so I'm going to have him on in this episode today to get his thoughts on all of this as well. So looking forward to that. And so for now, let's get into Jake Barber. And here we go. So let's just dive right into it. Ross Coulthart, investigative journalist for NewsNation, which is like an independent sort of up and coming news station that I think is trying to position themselves to be up there with the big players, like the legacy media. But they are by nature an independent media outlet. And they are the outlet that David Grush, the whistleblower, went to. Ross Coulthart's the one who interviewed him. So certainly I had high expectations for Jake Barber on NewsNation just because Coulthart I knew it would be legit. And he had, because he had Grush, and, he's, in my mind, the journalist in the media that is sort of at the tip of the spear of trying to expose whatever the truth is about this subject, or at least whatever we can get out of the entities in our government, private, industrial, military complex that do have information that we don't have about what this all is on that level. Anyway, so Jake Barber, and again, just to be clear, like all his credentials are checked out and vetted. Of course, Ross Coulthart wouldn't attach himself, and NewsNation certainly wouldn't if it didn't all check out. So he was in the U.S. Air Force. He was what's described as a very high specialized helicopter operator. And after he left the Air Force, he was working for a big private contractor. And he was retrieving UFOs, is what he says he was doing. And of course, it really shouldn't surprise us if David Grush's claims are, legit, which that's what everybody that went to that meeting in January of last year with the ICIG, who was the one who has all of Grush's evidence, and all the senators and representatives that came out of that secret meeting that they weren't allowed to talk about, they all said, the one thing they all said was Grush's claims are legitimate. They're based in legitimate, serious issues. So it shouldn't really surprise us that somebody who flew one of the vehicles for crash retrieval is now coming forward. And that's what we're saying here is basically the position he had makes sense. And just think about it for a moment, like these kind of people must be out there, like assuming the core part of David Grush's claims are true. There's decades-long UFO crash retrievals. I mean, geez, how many people are that's involved in these operations? And that's pretty nuts. Like to be a helicopter pilot that actually worked on this. It's very interesting. And so here's how my highlights kind of unfold. Early on, Jake Barber does say that a lot of what he recovered was, quote, man-made advanced technology. And it's ambiguous. It's not clear if he's saying he recovered technology that like is prosaic and we know about it, or if it's like man-made UFOs, basically. But when I was watching, listening in the moment, it seemed like he was saying like they were secret, advanced, exotic, man-made craft that he was picking up too. And hopefully we'll get more clarity on that when the full interview that's supposed to be like 2+ hours with him is supposed to be getting released this week. This was like a 1 hour special on NewsNation, like edited and, you know, kind of dressed up a certain way, which we'll get to that too. The second bullet point, Barber mentioned the craft were transmedium, and he even said there in the third point that these were seen, quote, going through mountains and coming out of mountains. And that's something that I've heard before, for example, in reports from Skinwalker Ranch, is that that's some of the stuff they were detecting there. You know, Travis Taylor and all of them, I've seen them talk about seeing craft moving through, you know, physical matter, like it's not there. So interesting to hear that. And yeah, again, we just need to get that clarification if the tech was like advanced human-made UFOs or if it was other advanced tech. What is he talking about exactly? Some other details that he goes into that I think are important to clarify is he says, quote, ranking members of the UAP task force, unquote, confirmed to him that he had recovered NHI craft. So my read from it was like, he's going out there, he's pickup point is here, go pick it up, bring it back. That's probably like all his job is. And that's certainly the implication from what he's shared. And so how would he know if it's human or not human? So it makes sense that he would defer that confirmation to ranking members of the UAP task force. I don't know what that means, ranking members. I'm going to assume that means the highest level people there, like Jay Stratton and so forth, which is interesting that now we're just seeing, like in the last hour or two, I'm seeing pop up, you know, the whisperings of that a documentary with Jay Stratton is on the horizon. So that's interesting. And actually, we'll ask for Pavel's take on that, since, you know, he's really got an ear to what's going on sort of moment to moment here. Now, yes, the egg is sort of taking the show with this whole incident here with Jake Barber, but he also describes something, and forgive me if I'm saying it wrong, but it sounds like they're saying eight gong or eight gong, I don't know. But basically he said this was like your classic flying disc, flying saucer. And he says they recovered these. He said at one point there was an incident where more than one of them crashed at a time and they went and recovered them. And you wonder, like he said before, advanced man-made tech, you know, multiple crashing at the same time. Is he recovering operations of like tests of secret technology as well as NHI? Of course, you know, he does make that clear in the interview, though, that he believes it was NHI. And part of that, I think, is tied into this, which becomes the more, as people like to use the term, woo-woo sort of part of his story, which is when he got close to this flying disc craft, he sort of felt this energy take over him. His instruments started acting up. And then he says he feels like something went inside of him. He became possessed. But rather than it being this dark sort of demonic thing, he describes it as being like the most beautiful experience of his life. He kind of gets choked up and is crying in the interview briefly. And he describes it as the, quote, the feminine spirit of God. And we'll get to what I think of all that in the final analysis of like what to make of all this. So more information from Jake Barber in the interview from Saturday. He said the UFO craft are, quote, invited to land by the psionics team. And what the psionics team is described as is allegedly you, with your consciousness through meditation, can sort of attract these UFOs um, and bring them within where you are. And that's, of course, what people attest to that works with the CE5 so-called method that the Stephen Greer Disclosure Project has been doing. And even people that, don't like him or sort of criticize him, a lot of those people still say like the CE5 thing works. I actually had someone on my podcast here um, last year that does the CE5, and she was describing to me their experiences, and that where for her perspective it's definitely effective. And as Jake Barber says himself in the second bullet, UAP can be, quote, summoned. And when he was asked again, he said yes, 100%. So we'll get to this later because I mean it's not hard for me to believe this, but I'm just thinking of like the average person that it's just a lot to swallow. But we'll come back to that. What I want to focus on here is the distinction between Jake Barber's language that these UFOs were invited to land, okay, and then you see the bullet point under there. He never mentions that these were shot down, okay, and that's the story we heard, for example, from Mike Herrera, the whistleblower who said that he saw something in Indonesia that was some sort of human black ops operation with a UFO, and that he then became approached by someone in this program later on, years later after he came out, and this person started explaining to him how this particular program worked, and it involved people with this psychic talent to bring the UFOs, lure them in, but then shoot them down with advanced weapons. Now, Barber doesn't say that, at least not in this first hour on NewsNation. He doesn't mention shooting them down. He says they're invited to land. This is one of the big questions we're going to need to get to the bottom of as this story continues to unfold, because there's been a lot of ambiguity. So, for example, like when David Grush spoke first, he said, he was ambiguous with it. He said, they have been landed or crashed. He said they were landed or crashed. If you listen to the NewsNation interview in 2023 with Grush, he didn't say they landed and crashed. They were landed. Okay, now you hear Jake Barber saying they were invited to land. What exactly is going on there? Are they being shot down? Are they being landed? It'll be interesting to see what kind of information comes out of there and what kind of clarity there is. But let's see how that develops. I guess let's leave it at that. What's good about Jake Barber is that there were also 3 corroborating witnesses. These were all members of the Special Forces teams, and apparently they're also going to have longer interviews that come out when NewsNation releases the rest. This is important, of course. Corroboration is key. And from the comments in this first episode here, we saw they corroborated this psionics aspect, that there are these programs to psychically lure the UFOs. And basically, there were also these whistleblowers, at least one of these corroborating witnesses was asked point blank, like, did you work on a UFO crash retrieval operation with Jake? And the guy said, yes. All right, so that kind of stuff is going to be important, and getting all these people under oath before Congress, that's what I've always said from the beginning of this is going to move the needle forward and get to the bottom of what is really going on here. Is just to have that critical mass of witnesses coming out there and naming specifics. So he's asked, don't you think this will be an ontological shock for people? And Barber says he thinks it'll be a, quote, ontological relief, and that it, quote, should be welcomed, saying that most people already believe that, our reality isn't this simple little thing that we think it is. It's greater than that. So I would agree with him there. And I actually think, even though it's going to be weird at first, if this information really proves true and we start to come to terms with what has been going on here potentially, that'll be an adjustment, but ultimately it will be a relief too, right? To just be like, there is more to it, and we're not just spinning alone on this rock in this void that we don't even know what anything is. At least there's other people. There's other people out there, and I don't know. I don't know what is going to unfold here, but just spitballing here. And he also does make the claim, quote there in the second bullet point, NHI are guiding us. All right, which have your pick on where you stand there. There's been a lot of information in the UFO literature over the decades, certainly lots of stories about telling us, to watch what path we're going down with nuclear weapons and that whole kind of thing. And there's, good reasons and certain authors that have thought that that is some type of even a psychological operation by trying to kind of social engineer or shape society. There are some that think that that is really what's happening. And I think I tend to, a lot of times it's a very gray area. A lot of times it's an all of the above situation, because I certainly could see that happening. But guiding us is an interesting way of putting it. And I just think there's a very nuanced line there that we have to be careful of, I think, just to make sure we're not just like looking at it as this greater intelligence is some kind of savior or something. I think we should stay objective in that sense, but that's not to say, hey, if this guy had his experience and he feels like they're guiding him, tell your story. It's all good. Now, getting back to some more nuts and bolts stuff, pretty interesting. He shares how the helicopters would carry these mystery boxes, is what they were called, super top secret materials of some kind or another, and he was authorized to use lethal force to protect the shipment, the moving of the boxes. And this is where him and his team concluded they had gotten their sickness from. And this sickness included hair loss, it included skin loss and other health issues. So that's going to be, that's a whole part of this story too. And we'll see how that goes. Other skeletons that are going to have to come out about this, if all these programs really hold up, the claims of Grush and now these witnesses coming forward. He says it, quote, seems to be the case, unquote, that people have been murdered to keep the program secret. Another one of his corroborating witnesses, who's 25 years in special forces, also said on the record that people have been killed working on the program. And Jake Barber also says that at one point there was a assassination hit out on him. So this also aligns and tracks with everything that David Grush was saying when he was interrogated by Congress in 2023. Also, a bit more of a nuanced kind of detail that I haven't really seen before with any of the whistleblowers is apparently they use, like you see in that image there I put, they use these Panasonic Tough Books, is what he called them. And apparently they have data drives on there that house the pictures, videos, documentation, whatever other kind of data about these specifically about these UFO crash retrieval programs. And Jake Barber said that he and his team, because I guess their idea was to get evidence and essentially put it out to the public, which makes sense logically, right? If you're like special forces and you're doing all this special forces stuff, why not try to do it to like blow the whistle? And if you get it out there, you'll be vindicated from any type of law you're breaking. I would think, if you are able to prove to the world, that there's aliens and the government's been covering it up for decades. So it kind of checks out, even though it sounds like a movie or something. And especially when he says they found two of them in the Sierra Mountains. So apparently, whatever this organized program is or network, they hide these data devices in remote mountain regions in the country, which is just kind of crazy and cool to think about. Like, imagine you're out on a hike and doing a backpacking trip, and you don't know, there could be briefcases of UFO evidence a couple miles away, buried somewhere. But anyway, he said when they went there to recover them, one of them had been moved, but that they tracked it down in a quote high altitude lake. So pretty interesting. Just like all this stuff is stuff that a government investigation could follow up on. And I think it gets more into more of the kind of abstract, the kind of uh, esoteric or immaterial aspect of this consciousness-based phenomenon. And this is where I have a little bit of some questions, because at one point in the interview, he essentially says and implies that like these psionic operators, these psychic operators for these secret military programs, like that they can actually pilot UFOs that are out there, I guess, in space time in one form or another. I get, like, as I look at this at a basic level, right? I get the idea that you could like attract them, because if you are like tuning into a certain wavelength, they might start to be drawn towards you and like appear in the sky. Like, I totally get that. But like the aspect that we could like take over the piloting of that craft and like move it and direct it, I don't, I'd like to get more information on that. I know that with the Michael Herrera claims, he claimed that what they were doing in these underground base sites was actually taking the talent, the talent, if you will, of the actual psychic person, connecting them through some sort of technological medium, and then controlling craft that they had built, or that they were their craft they were operating. So is he just talking about that, or like, I would be a little confused if you could like literally with psionics like start piloting someone else's craft. Like, that just doesn't really make sense to me, really. Um, anyway, and then the second bullet point, also he says that at one point one of the classic discs actually like morphed into an egg-shaped craft. So there's some question marks there, and we've heard the morphing before. We've heard the morphing of the shapes, that has been a thing, and even separating into different units. So that's not anything new. It's interesting that to bring that up, and it always raises questions of like, what is the connection of consciousness to this phenomenon, And I think that's an interesting thread to pull at, and I guess even to go deeper down the rabbit hole there. Could that be some of what these witnesses experience is actually human experimentation? Is a disc morphing into an egg? Could that possibly be holographic? That looks so real, um, or is that just super advanced intelligence that's capable of literally changing their shape? You hear this a lot. I mean, even in some of the books that I read studying Eastern philosophy and the teachings of the yogis, they said, the masters, as they called them, of meditation, these yogis that spend lifetimes in a cave meditating, and all of that, that they can kind of manipulate space-time. You hear about the spoon bending, supposedly. I mean, still, I've never seen it. I haven't researched it really enough either, but you could imagine a super advanced consciousness being able to literally rearrange particles and matter in different ways, and certainly even technology that could do that. So that he dropped that in the interview, or he's reporting seeing that, it's pretty interesting. And we'll maybe, it's a sign of kind of getting the full picture here. So let's talk about his credibility. Okay, so that's pretty much his claims at this point. Again, we're going to get that longer 2+ hours with him. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of other things in there. But let's talk about his credibility. Again, it's Ross Coulthart. And Coulthart said that, and if you've read Ross Coulthart's book, which that was I kind of read Ross Coulthart's book without really any preconceptions. And, you could tell even himself, he's naturally skeptical. And his standard of evidence is pretty high. So for him to be attaching himself to this, I think is a indication. Nonetheless, he says there are multiple top-level JSOC, which is Joint Special Operations Command. These are like the top special forces unit, one of the top special forces unit of the U.S. military. And he said top-level officers, multiple, are ready to come forward to corroborate Barber. I guess when the time is right is kind of what he implied. And you see in the second point there, which I have highlighted in yellow, of course, and which is what I put in the thumbnail for this video, which to me is the most important thing, in my opinion, of all of this, is that Coulthart said he, quote, Barber wants to be investigated, wants to be tested, wants to be put under oath and interrogated. So it's all good. You can come out and talk about all this stuff and literally say you retrieved non-human spacecraft for the U.S. military and private contractors. It's another thing to go out there in front of the world and stick to your story, to be investigated by Congress under oath, and he's ready to do it. So to me, I'm just like, I don't need to believe you or disbelieve you now. Like, I'm going to believe that you're reporting what you experienced, and let's go through the process of, doing it all under oath and actually having an investigation. Third point, Coulthart says there's, quote, a conga line of other witnesses ready to come forward. But an interesting detail shared by NewsNation was that this Jake Barber is not one of David Grush's 40 witnesses. So that's pretty interesting. He's not one of Grush's 40. So I think that's important to keep in mind, as that, how that might become significant, we'll see. And another thing to clarify, that green video was not from Jake Barber. And I think maybe we'll get more detail in the extended release by NewsNation, but in the first one, they did not say where it came from. They just said like a defense source. It was very vague. And that's really important. And we'll get to that in the analysis next, is like, I wouldn't have put that out there unless you said, especially a video of that quality where like it could be anything. It's green, it could really be anything. But if you were to say this has been 100% verified to have come from a helicopter operation on a top secret mission here from this department, then it would have carried more weight. But to just say it came from a defense source, not too sure about that. So let's get into kind of concluding the analysis here, and the final thoughts. All right. I think that this is a step forward, hopefully, as I say there, because look, we can be critical, and we should be, but we should also keep a balanced perspective, I believe, because look, this is a guy coming forward, willing to be completely interrogated by all the highest authorities of the government military, which, imagine being in that kind of a position about these kind of claims. Dude, again, is checked out, just like Grush, just like Sands, just like all of them, who worked in this type of a position. And he's saying that this is what happened and this is going on. So we need that. We need people like him to come forward. We need more and more people to come forward and share their side of what they've experienced and let the truth come out that way. If it's all just a huge psychological operation or a bunch of delusional people, then let that truth come out. The truth will reveal itself. I do believe that. Or maybe not. But whatever. I believe that that is ultimately what happens when you let it come out. So, but to the second point here, and this is where we'll be a little critical of this whole event here, is questionable presentation choices. Okay, the video we've talked about, I wouldn't have put that video out there, but maybe I get it. Maybe it's the best that they could do at this point. I'm sure it probably really is legit, and I'm sure that is some kind of UAP. It's just unfortunate that it's a night vision camera, and it's just like, how the average person is. Like, they're going to look at this and laugh at it. And then people were doing that already. So I think it invites a lot of ridicule. And also the fact that the way they produced this episode was they really talked a lot about, psychically luring UFOs and inviting UFOs to land, and psionics, and Jake Barber getting all emotional and crying and saying he got possessed and it was the most beautiful feminine thing in the world. Like, I don't think that's a good choice if you're trying to break this to the general public, to take this seriously and to start to kind of come to terms with this being a serious issue that we deserve to know the truth about. It opens it up for ridicule, obviously. I mean, I'm open-minded. I've experienced things. I am all about, to be open with you. I've had this number of psilocybin experiences, and I do often perceive a sort of feminine quality to what I'm perceiving as kind of the universe, whatever you want to call it. So I'm not surprised. I'm sure what he said happened probably did really happen to him. But there's also some nuances to that as well, which maybe we'll have to dive into in a later video, because I don't want to jump there right now. And that's essentially the idea that, could this have been a man-made craft? And if it was, what does that tell you? That when he got close to it, he had this kind of transformative experience. Like, who knows what kind of stuff they have figured out in that realm. And it's a video I've been wanting to do for a long time. I did the research on it. I have notes. I have to make a video, but a lot of FOIA documents have shown like some crazy stuff that has been experimented with, and even alien abductions were being simulated. And this was in the 80s. They were trying to see if they could simulate an alien abduction. So that's just like an idea of who knows. And there was lots of research into, like, with electronic devices being able to like go into someone else's mind. It's really dark stuff, but the crazy thing is it's like all there in government documents. And at some point I will make a video on this book that I'm referring to. So, all to say, off a little bit of a tangent there, is like, it had a lot of woo, so-called, and it had, a bad video, what I would call. So, very questionable. Now, to my third bullet point, where I say Coulthart's confidence. My read, listening closely to what Ross Coulthart is saying and just the whole picture, is that I think Ross is so confident as to what behind the scenes he's been able to deduce as like the core truths of the phenomena that can be generally known to be true. He's so confident in what's going to come out and what it is that he probably doesn't really care that, like, it seems so ridiculous right now to someone who's never even thought of this. Grainy green video of some egg, a guy crying and saying he was possessed by the feminine spirit of a UFO, and people can psychically bring UFOs down. Like, this just sounds insane to someone who's never thought about this, with all due respect. So my read there is like, Ross is so confident that what's coming down the pike is going to establish the ground truth that he doesn't really care. And I could be wrong, but that's just my read that I'm sharing. Fourth point, as usual, the media has not touched this. If you actually read between the lines, right before, during the day on Saturday or Friday night, Chris Cuomo, who's one of the big anchors on NewsNation. They were trying to, someone in the legacy media was trying to like censor and block NewsNation at 24 hours prior to this. So I thought that was probably connected. Um, but again, no one has thought to mention this. And I made a whole video on this a few weeks ago after we had the hearing in November that we waited a year and a half for. That the media didn't even cover it. And that's one of their best tools. And Ross Coulthart has even said it himself that that is an effective tool. But he said in one of his recent reality check shows, he said it's not going to work in the long term. And they're doing it with this too. I don't, correct me if I'm wrong, but I haven't seen anyone. You have your typical like New York Post and those ones that can get away with like the sensational stuff to cover this, but I haven't seen any really serious reporting from mainstream media on this, but that's to be expected. And as I say there, I think it's a long game. It's more about building up. I mean, again, Grush had 40 people that named, and that's just one thing. And Barber wasn't even part of that 40. So imagine we just get like hundreds of people say. There's got to be a critical mass point where something happens. Okay. And what ultimately needs to happen is a high level, serious investigation that's carried out where people can go do things that we can't, the general public. So whistleblowers need to keep coming forward. And people need to keep vetting the whistleblowers because I think that everyone who's bringing them out is probably doing that, except the ones that are potentially part of a psyop, which is our last point. But about the whistleblowers, yeah, I think overall we can be positive about this, and let's get more people out. Another helicopter pilot says did the same thing. I mean, I think it's just going to take time and more people coming forward, and that's why everyone keeps talking about we need the better whistleblower protections. Yes, yes. So that's still probably one of the cards the group trying to keep the lid on this still can play. Is a lot of people don't want to come forward because, like, would you want your family to be threatened, or in one way or another? Would you, so it's still pretty easy, I think, to keep people quiet, and that's why, as much as we can criticize the program, as much as we can question a guy like Jake Barber and raise our eyebrows a little bit, I definitely am going to say he's courageous for coming forward with this kind of allegations, which we know have received retaliation for whatever reason. If it's all fake and not real, like the Pentagon maintains, then why the retaliation? So that's kind of where I'm at with that, and we'll close on the last point here, and then we're going to have Pavel come in. I'm going to ask Pavel what his take on the whole Barber situation is, and all of the other stuff that's happening right now. So that'll be our last segment in the show today. And is it all PSYOP? There are some people that think this could be some coordinated PSYOP. Well, hey, if it is, then let's find out, right? And like David Grush said on Joe Rogan, he said, "What's the big deal? If I'm full of it, then let's just go do an investigation. Let's find out." You know, and he's right. And the fact that hasn't moved forward, I think, is telling. The fact that he's been blocked to speaking with people in Congress who want to investigate, I think, is telling. Everything is. But I think we're still in the early stages here. This is a good step forward with Jake Barber coming forward. A lot of little data points here that are going to be interesting to see how it unfolds. I actually think it's pretty exciting. And I think that's a good segue to bring Pavel in, who's really great at keeping up on how things are unfolding every day. All right, so we're going to bring Pavel in now.
Hi, how's everyone? Thank you for
All right.
having me.
Of course, man. Yeah. So I just shared my breakdown of the Jake Barber interview, the first one on Saturday. So, and there's so much seeming like action happening now. So I wanted to get your thoughts on Jake Barber, and then we'll kind of take it into more of all the other stuff that seems to be going on now.
Yeah, well, first of all, I think that the sharing of his experience when he was approaching to retrieve that disc object, that took a lot of courage because in America there is this preconception of not being able as a male to share like your emotions. And I think that what he did was very important um, to combat that preconception because, for example, I know that you are very open and you do seem like you like to share that, but there's a lot of people that don't, and people that are following this topic. And when I saw that, I was like, yes, that's something that we need more in when we're trying to understand the phenomenon, because I do believe this consciousness and potentially even spiritual aspect of it is going to play a key role when everything comes out. So for me, that was one of the biggest takeaways. And I saw Matthew Pines talking about the video when he visited Matt Ford on the Good Trouble show.
Mm.
And what he said, I think, was very interesting. A lot of people missed it. Sharing that video, although the video was not compelling, I think was a warning shot. And and Matt Pines did share that. He was like, we already know that there's a lot of video footage out there that is very compelling.
Uh,
And this was like, because they knew what kind of video was that. It is a video that was classified and kept secret.
mm,
So whoever was keeping it secret, and when they saw that, that was like all the alarms went off. Like they have
mm,
this stuff. That
mm.
was very interesting to me. That was the aspect of the video that a lot of people missed, and I think that is going to be very important moving forward.
That's a great point, and that's why it's great to get your perspective in here because I'm just going over my notes right in the video before you came on, and those were two of my questions. Was why I'm a little bit curious why the grainy green video, like I would have held off for something else. But then at the same time, I'm like, okay, but it's something. And then my other question was like, were they ambiguous about the source? They didn't like if you were going to put out a grainy video like that, at least be like, this came from this exact department on this exact date on this exact thing, and then at least you'd be like, oh, it's a real video. But what you're saying adds a whole nother dimension to it and
Yeah.
makes sense,
Yeah.
which is
And it
interesting.
doesn't matter the provenance, as long as they find out that it's real, they go
Yeah,
like, oh shit, we have that, you know? And
yeah,
that's what mattered, I think. And that's what a lot of people missed.
yeah. That's important. And now, so you're saying that's from Matthew Pines saying to have knowledge of that,
Yeah.
and he shared that today or before it
He
came out.
shared it on last Sunday, right after the interview.
Okay.
He was on Matt Ford's show, and that's what he talked about. And I found that very, very interesting and important for the conversation. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And for me, it was like, I'm always looking at this through the lens of like, what is the average person how they're gonna take this?
Yeah.
And so I'm like always kind of filtering when I'm watching. Like I have my reaction feeling, but then I'm like, all right, but how's the public gonna receive this? And I was kind of like interesting that they kind of went with the more far out stuff of the psychic luring of the UFOs, and even like Jake Barber kind of breaking down a little bit in the video. Your average person would look at that and there's a lot of opportunity to ridicule the green
Yeah.
video. But my read was like from Ross Coulthard was like they probably have so much. It seems he seems confident was my take that there's a lot more coming.
There is.
What are your thoughts on that? On that, like that they kind of let these more far-fetched elements out rather than stick to like nuts and bolts, like I'm a serious military guy and I picked up craft, like they.
Yeah. I think that this is the exact way that this is supposed to go,
Mm.
because yes, the nuts and bolts is very interesting, and that conversation also needs to happen because there were retrieved craft since the 40s that have been they've been trying to reverse engineer, but the consciousness aspect of this And when we spoke in the interview on my channel, I did tell you that for me, learning the real uh, our real abilities, the real extent of our abilities, and the history of our potential as humans,
Mm,
I think that is also central in the conversation because pretty much every abduction story tells you that there is a telepathic aspect to it. And if we weren't telepathic, we would not be able to communicate with these beings. And we can see, for example, Chris Bledsoe in his encounter when he spoke to the NHI, he thought uh, of giving up and like at the mercy of this thing, and this thing responded to him because it heard Chris Bledsoe. You
mm,
know, that means we're also telepathic.
no.
So that's central to the story, and I was really happy to know and to see Ross going that down that direction because it's the most important conversation for me.
Yeah, and I was happy that you got to share that at the end of that interview on your channel. Um, when I asked you, I'm like, what do you think, or what are you expecting? And you shared that viewpoint, and actually thought of you when I watched the program on Saturday night, because I was like, oh wow, they did go with that already, the
Yeah,
psychic angle of it. You were mentioning part of the secret, and in your view, maybe the biggest part of the secret is the human abilities that we're not aware of.
yeah,
And I found it interesting because James Lukatsky, you know, um, in that one interview that he gave to Jeremy Corbell,
yeah.
that stuck with me. He said when he was really put on the spot at a certain point, he was like, "My biggest takeaway is like the human abilities that we're not, that are part of the
And he knows,
astonishment."
like
Yeah, yeah.
he has direct knowledge on that.
Yep.
And that is also one of the reasons I've been investigating Dr. Greenberg so much because I think he's one of those scientists that were taken against their will to work on this and to train people on psi abilities. But and he was silenced, like essentially. And I told you, I don't know if I did tell you, every time I ask about this to people who know, they deviate from the question and deflect, and they play dumb. And
Hmm.
there's a lot of history of this. Since Stargate started, there was Andrea Pujarik, who is like essentially the pioneer of psi abilities research in the United States. And his story is very, very fundamental to the whole psi abilities topic
Mm,
because he's the first one who made the connection from the American side that people from native communities, indigenous communities, have these skills more developed than us city boys, you
mm,
know?
mm-hmm,
And he was the first one who made that connection. Greenberg had been studying Pachita and other shamans for at least 10 years before Pujarik caught wind of this.
mm,
And that's why I think Greenberg was so important to them. And that's why they wanted him to stay quiet and stop trying to announce to the world that telepathy is real and it's mainstream because that's what he essentially tried to do. And it wasn't time yet for them, according to them. But in the process, they made a very important scientist in Mexico's history disappear.
yeah, that's fascinating. And I actually look forward to, I'd love to do a deep dive with you and have you come on the podcast and really dive into this stuff because I'm
Yeah.
fascinated by it. And you've done a lot of research on it. I think people would love that. So, um, and then, yeah, I mean, so the psychic element of the UFOs. Now, so I want to ask you though, what else are you hearing out there? I'm seeing things even in the last few hours. I'm seeing that Jay Stratton material that was talked about seems like now, what is there, a release date now and
So,
something?
documentary trailer just dropped,
Okay.
and it had been talked about for months. I have been hearing this since October, I think, about this Dan Farah producer guy who also produced Ready Player One, the Steven Spielberg movie.
Ah,
And he just dropped the documentary trailer. It's called The Age of Disclosure.
the age of disclosure.
He
Okay.
interviewed 30 plus people from the intelligence community, politicians, from the military, and scientists who all have had clearances at some point. Some have the highest clearances. James Clapper is part of this group, who used to be ODNI. And this guy, this is something that not a lot of people know.
Hmm.
This guy doesn't have to go through DOPSR because he's above DOPSR. DOPSR is a process that only DoD employees have to go through. He doesn't, so he can talk about anything. He doesn't need permission to talk about this stuff, and he has knowledge.
Huh.
And yes, Jay Stratton did talk about having direct, firsthand knowledge that he saw craft, and he said he saw beings, not bodies, beings, meaning they were maybe alive. That's wild.
Yeah. I mean, I think Stratton's going to be a real important one because he ran that program, the
Yeah,
UAP task force. He hired Grush. I mean, I have pretty high expectations for
yeah.
whatever facts are going to come out of him coming forward.
And the way the movie's coming out too, they made a couple of articles in Variety, Deadline, Hollywood, so the big publications, and
Mm.
it's coming out on the South by Southwest Festival in March. So it's gonna be like a bang.
They're playing it at the festival.
Yeah,
Oh, that's great.
yeah. And the
I just
rumor,
Mhm.
the rumor is that there's the best footage ever taken of a UFO. But that's just a rumor. That's since started hearing about this, that's what I've heard, consistently.
Right.
So let's wait and see.
Now let me ask you, Pavel, of your take on this, because I'm always trying to look at things as objectively as I can with the information at hand. I'm always gonna sort of have my guard up a little bit for like psychological operations, the
Oh
intelligence
yeah.
community, because looking at the history. So like, do you have anything or you hear anything about this production and what the message is going to be in the details of like anything, any red flags at all or anything?
Yeah. And this is something that I haven't talked about on my channel because I'm still kind of um thinking about it, but I can tell you that it was very clear to me just by watching the trailer that they're taking the threat narrative
Oh no.
very, very, very seriously. And they're adding this quote unquote um, race for this technology,
Ooh, that's
which
not good, man,
also, yeah.
in my
And they
opinion.
mentioned China and Russia, and it's like,
Damn, because I like Jay Stratton though, and everything I've seen him, but I'm
yeah,
also like, I don't know what the deal is. But so you're hearing that in the
yeah,
trailer, and
yeah. You can play it after this video. Obviously, watch it, um, but you can play it after. I mean, I don't think they'll flag anything. I played in my channel, and it's just a trailer.
yeah. Now, would you say that that kind of contrasts with Jake Barber? Because I didn't really hear any direct threat. The threat was more like the damage caused to the humans from being a part of these programs.
Yeah.
And obviously, it was more benevolent interaction that he claims he had. So,
Honestly, I think that we're dealing with both things. I don't think it's just love and light, and I don't think it's just a threat. I think both things are happening. If it
right.
is real, it just makes no sense that just one thing is happening.
Yeah, I tend to follow there too. Um,
But I don't think that uh, leaning on the threat aspect of it is positive or smart. I think there needs to be a middle ground, because that's just going to scare people. And I don't think acting out of fear is smart. I'm from a sports journalism background. I love the UFC. I will never see one of the best UFC fighters get in the octagon
Mhm.
and being scared. They're always very cool, very calm,
Yeah.
very, you know. And I
Yeah.
think that's the way we need to approach this. Just even if it's daunting and scary, even we
Let
need
the
to be
people
calm.
that need to, handle that threat know that, right?
Yeah,
But let us know what we need to know, which I
yeah,
think is more than what we do publicly know.
yeah,
I mean, whatever, I don't know. We get into different territory there because, like, how are we defining threat? And even if there's no overt threat, but that's a whole nother conversation, we could
yeah.
get.
I think if they're a threat, they are as much of a threat as a hurricane is a threat.
Right.
Not necessarily having like malintent against us. It's
Yeah.
just that we're just. I always use this reference just to as an example. Whenever you are going through a field and you don't notice that there's like an ant colony there, and you step on it, that's a threat for the ants. You killed a lot of ants just right there.
Yeah.
I see it that way. It's like we're so insignificant if they exist, in terms of how much difference there is in technology and probably consciousness,
Hmm.
that they don't really care about us. If they did, if they wanted to attack us, they would have done it already long ago, you know?
Yes. I think what I agree with what you're saying. And I agree with those points. I also think like there's probably such a spectrum of potentially different entities and things going on that you look at, like, I think about like what David Grush said in his NewsNation interview. Like, he started alluding to like the possibility of some um, not being that much far advanced than us, or like on a parallel track. So like I could imagine there being civilizations that are ahead of us, but maybe close enough that they would be interested in, I
Yeah,
don't know. And then you hear all the lore of secret agreements. I mean, part of the claims of certain whistleblowers, like Jason Sands, seems to be like there was actual interaction and
yeah,
working on them. We know all the bodies and research claims and all this. So if it turns out there's kind of stuff is going on, I guess there's a spectrum. And I definitely do agree with you that there's probably then more advanced consciousness, like you said in the ant analogy,
yeah.
which really makes sense, and some of that harm. So I guess it's a question we have to look at, right? Is there like intentional harm that's been done? Is it just control? You know,
And
are
from
we in
which
a
group?
prison that we can't even see?
Yeah. And from which group too?
Yeah,
Because there's always been this narrative that for decades now, that there's a group that is trying to protect us and there's a group that is not. And they're at war with each other and we're in the middle. And this also goes all the way back to ancient scripture, and religious people get really riled up about this because they're instantly saying, "Oh, it's the gods" and all that stuff. And
yeah,
I just think that all of these preconceived notions of gods and angels and all this stuff is just misinterpretation of some type of entities that uh, are real and have interacted with humanity throughout history, but we interpreted them as such. They may not be gods at all. They may be just advanced species of something.
yeah, yeah. I hear you on that, and it all kind of ties together.
Yeah.
It'll be really fun to have you back and to just and dive into it all.
Yep.
Um, so, in closing out today, what can you share with us on your view on what do you see coming down the pike, and any other things we should be looking out for
Well,
with disclosure, I guess, and like
I guess that we would have to take a look at all the interviews that are coming out on NewsNation of Jake's team. Uh, that admiral, I think it was, no, Lieutenant Colonel. He's very interesting. He's actually right now he's talking to Matt Ford on the Good Trouble Show, so
I saw
you might
that.
want to check it out later.
Yeah.
And that's one thing. Another thing I think um, has to do with how to preserve and keep being more open about these abilities that we have. At Rice University, there's Professor Jeffrey Kripal, who has is curating the archives of the impossible, and he is doing an excellent job at just it's a repository of all the material, books, videos, studies, scientific studies of everything that has to do with phenomenology.
Hmm.
And I think that's going to be one of the main bastions of uh, all the activities that we're going to have to start doing after all of this comes out. Because after disclosure, when that comes out, there's a lot to do. There's a lot of re-education to do.
Hmm.
There's a lot of new conversations to have with all the people that are not on this, which is still the vast majority of humans. So we need to start those archives, for example. They're like some of the best initiatives that we can find on the topic, because we're already going to have a lot of this material that we're going to be able to show people after they realize, okay, so this is real. Now what? You know, I
Yes.
think I think that's very important. And I'm gonna have Professor Kripal soon on the show, so you can look out for that.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll definitely check that out. And that's a great point. You're almost saying like we start to look further into the horizon at what kind of adjustments might need to be made and things learned after, even though right now it's pretty interesting, and I would even say exciting. I'm hoping I'm not getting excited for nothing, because I still think it could technically all still be swept under the rug for decades more. That is still possible, in my
Yeah,
opinion. But it does seem to be like lots moving. Um,
yeah,
so I really appreciate you coming on, sharing your viewpoint, and giving us more perspective on this. And it'll be interesting to see the full. They said what, like 2+ hours of actual interview with Jake Barber,
yeah.
and
2.5 hours. Yeah,
I'm sure there's going to be a lot of other stuff in there. So
yeah, a lot.
I appreciate you coming on. We're definitely going to have you back, and if you have the time, you know,
Yeah,
check in as things
anytime,
are
man.
happening, and then also we'll get this deep dive podcast set up to really get into the sci and the ancient stuff and whatever else you're
Yes, sir.
interested in.
Yes, sir. Thank you for having me.
You got it, Pavel. Talk to you soon.
All right, man.